My name is Ariella Ben Ali, and if you had asked me a year ago whether I would ever return to my hometown, I would have answered without hesitation. Never. For 12 years, I built a life far away from the Ben Ali family estate in Northern California. I became a forensic accountant in Chicago, specializing in uncovering financial fraud for corporations that had everything to lose if the truth came out. My work taught me one important lesson. Numbers rarely lie, but people often do. The distance between me and my family wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in silence. After my mother passed away, the warmth that once held our family together slowly disappeared. Conversations became shorter. Holidays became obligations instead of celebrations. Eventually, I stopped receiving invitations altogether. My father, Roland Ben Ali, never explained why. At first, I kept trying. I called. I wrote letters. I even drove home twice during the first few years after leaving. Every attempt ended with another closed door and another excuse that he was too busy. Eventually, I accepted that some families choose distance over reconciliation. So I focused on building a future that belonged entirely to me. My apartment overlooked the Chicago River. My days revolved around investigations, court reports, and endless spreadsheets. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. More importantly, it was peaceful. That peace lasted until one rainy Tuesday afternoon. I returned home after a long meeting involving a manufacturing fraud case and found a cream-colored envelope resting inside my mailbox. There was no return address. Only my name, handwritten across the front. I carried it upstairs without much thought. Inside was a formal invitation. The Ben Ali Family Annual Reunion. Location: Ben Ali Vineyard, Sonoma County. Date: Saturday. What caught my attention wasn't the event itself. It was the signatures. Every immediate family member had personally signed the invitation, including my father. I stared at his signature for several seconds. The last time I had seen his handwriting was on my mother's funeral program. I turned the card over, expecting a short note. There wasn't one. No explanation. No apology. Nothing except a simple sentence printed beneath the signatures. "We hope you'll come home." I read those words again. And again. For reasons I couldn't explain, they unsettled me more than they comforted me. People don't suddenly erase 12 years of silence with a single invitation. Something had changed. Or someone wanted me to believe it had. For the next 3 days, the invitation sat untouched on my kitchen counter. Every morning before work, I looked at it. Every evening, I told myself I wasn't going. By Friday night, curiosity had defeated common sense. Early Saturday morning, I packed a small overnight bag and began the 6-hour drive west toward Sonoma. The familiar road stirred memories I had spent years trying to forget. The coffee shop where my mother always stopped after church. The old gas station where my father taught me how to check tire pressure. The elementary school where every teacher knew the Ben Ali name. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had simply changed. As the afternoon sun settled across the rolling vineyards, I finally reached the entrance to our family property. Rows of grapevines stretched across the hills exactly as they had when I was a little girl. The large stone house still overlooked the valley. Luxury cars filled the parking area. Music drifted through the open courtyard. Children laughed somewhere behind the house. For one brief moment, hope slipped into my thoughts. Maybe this invitation really was an attempt to reconnect. Maybe enough time had passed. Maybe people could change. I parked near the entrance, took one deep breath, and walked toward the gathering. The smell of grilled food filled the warm summer air. Long wooden tables were crowded with relatives talking, laughing, and raising glasses. Nearly 50 members of the Ben Ali family had gathered. The celebration looked genuine, until someone noticed me. One conversation stopped, then another. Within seconds, the laughter faded completely. Heads slowly turned in my direction. The silence spread across the courtyard with uncomfortable speed. No one smiled. No one waved. Several relatives looked away as if they had been caught doing something wrong. Others stared openly. Confused whispers began passing from one table to another. I slowed my steps. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Before I could say hello to anyone, I saw my father walking directly toward me. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had turned almost completely gray. His face carried deeper lines. But his expression remained impossible to read. I searched for even the smallest sign of happiness. There wasn't any. He stopped only a few feet away. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than 12 years apart. Then, without greeting me, without asking how I had been, Without even saying my name, he slowly raised his arm. His finger pointed toward the front gate. You need to leave. At first, I thought I had misunderstood. I'm sorry. His voice became louder. You heard me. Every conversation around us had stopped. Dozens of relatives watched without saying a single word. You weren't invited here. I blinked in disbelief. I received the invitation 3 days ago. I don't care what you received. His jaw tightened. You have some nerve showing up after everything you've done to this family. I felt my stomach tighten. What are you talking about? His eyes filled with anger. You stole from us. The accusation landed like a punch. Around us, relatives exchanged knowing looks. Some shook their heads. Others folded their arms, as if they had been waiting for this exact confrontation. I stood frozen, not because I was guilty, but because I had absolutely no idea what crime everyone believed I had committed. Before I could ask another question, someone behind my father slowly stepped forward. And the moment I recognized him, I realized this family reunion had never been about reconciliation. The man standing behind my father was Dorian Ben Ali, my older cousin. If anyone in the family knew how to command a room without raising his voice, it was Dorian. He was always polished, always calm, always the first person relatives praised whenever they talked about the future of the Ben Ali family business. Growing up, everyone compared me to him. Dorian graduated first. Dorian expanded the company. Dorian took care of Grandpa. Dorian never caused problems. That was the image everyone believed. As he approached me, he wore an expression that looked almost sympathetic. It made me uncomfortable. I'm sorry it had to happen like this, Ariella, he said quietly. I frowned. Then explain what everyone thinks I did. Instead of answering, he turned toward the guests. I think everyone deserves the truth. My father stepped aside. Dorian nodded toward one of the younger cousins, who immediately walked into the house and returned carrying a thick black leather binder. The moment I saw it, I knew this confrontation hadn't been spontaneous. Someone had prepared for it. Very carefully, Dorian accepted the binder and placed it on one of the long dining tables. Every relative slowly gathered around. Some looked curious. Others looked angry. A few refused to even look at me. Dorian opened the binder. Inside were hundreds of neatly organized pages protected by transparent sleeves. Bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, corporate expense reports, investment summaries, copies of internal accounting records. Every section had colorful tabs. Every page looked official. Every document appeared authentic. He turned several pages before stopping at one particular report. There, he said. Everyone should see it. He rotated the binder so the family could read. At the top of the page, printed in bold letters, was my name, Ariella Ben Ali. Below it appeared multiple financial transfers worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Destination accounts located outside the United States. According to the paperwork, those transfers had occurred during my final year working for the Ben Ali family company, before I moved to Chicago. I stared at the pages. I had never seen them before. I don't recognize any of this. My father scoffed. Of course you don't. Dorian slowly flipped to another section. This wasn't just one transaction. He continued turning pages. There were dozens. Each page looked worse than the last. The paperwork painted a complete story. According to the documents, I had secretly redirected company profits through fake consulting contracts before transferring the money into offshore investment accounts under shell companies connected to my name. It was detailed. Painfully detailed. Every transfer had approval signatures, accounting references, payment dates, internal authorization numbers. Even my digital signature appeared on several forms. The signatures looked real. Too real. Someone near the back whispered, I can't believe she did that. Another voice answered, that's why she disappeared. I always knew something wasn't right. Every whisper spread through the crowd like wildfire. No one asked for my explanation. The paperwork had already convinced them. Dorian sighed dramatically before closing one section of the binder. I tried convincing Uncle Roland not to involve everyone today. He lowered his head as though carrying a burden. But the family deserved honesty. Several relatives nodded in agreement. One of my aunts began crying quietly. An uncle folded his arms and refused to look in my direction. Even cousins I had once played with as children suddenly treated me like a stranger. I wanted to shout. I wanted to demand answers. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm. Emotion wouldn't save me. Facts might. I stepped closer to the binder. May I look? Dorian hesitated for only a second. Then he smiled. Go ahead. The confidence in his voice caught my attention. Either he believed the documents would survive scrutiny, or he believed nobody here knew enough to question them. I slowly turned the pages. Every report looked professionally prepared. The formatting matched corporate accounting software. The bank statements included routing numbers. The signatures were nearly perfect. Someone had invested an enormous amount of time creating this illusion. Then another thought entered my mind. If someone had gone through this much effort, this wasn't simply about embarrassing me. It was about making sure no one would ever believe me again. As I continued reading, I noticed something else. Several financial reports listed accounting policies that felt strangely familiar. Not because I had used them, because I knew exactly when those reporting standards had been introduced. My pulse slowed. I wasn't looking at proof anymore. I was looking for mistakes. Tiny mistakes. The kind only another forensic accountant would notice. I carefully examined another page. Then another. A pattern slowly began to emerge. Hidden beneath all the impressive formatting, something didn't make sense. Not yet. But I could feel it. Someone had built an incredibly convincing lie. And somewhere inside that lie, there had to be one small crack. I closed the binder gently and looked directly at Dorian. For the first time since arriving at the reunion, I smiled. It wasn't because I was happy. It was because I finally believed I could prove he had made a mistake. Dorian noticed the change in my expression. For the first time that afternoon, his confidence disappeared. Just for a second. And that single second told me everything. No one spoke as I reopened the binder. The silence around the table felt heavier than the accusation itself. Every pair of eyes followed my hands. Some expected me to confess. Others expected me to break down. Instead, I began reading every page as if I were sitting inside one of my firm's investigation rooms. Slowly, methodically, carefully, I ignored the whispers surrounding me. I ignored my father's cold stare. I ignored Dorian standing only a few feet away. The documents deserved my full attention. One page became 2. 2 became 10. Then 20. The paperwork was impressive. Every transfer contained matching account numbers. Every approval form included department references. Every signature looked authentic. If I hadn't spent years investigating corporate fraud, I might have believed every word. But fraud often failed in one place. Details. The people who create fake evidence usually focus on making it look convincing. They rarely think about whether every piece belongs in the correct time period. I reached another financial statement. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. Then I noticed a small paragraph at the bottom of the page. It referenced accounting standard ASC 842. I froze. ASC 842. That standard didn't become mandatory until years after the report claimed it had been prepared. I looked at the date printed across the top. June 2014. Impossible. The reporting language on that page literally could not have existed in 2014. I slowly turned another page. There it was again. Modern compliance wording inserted into records supposedly created years earlier. A coincidence was possible. A pattern was not. I kept reading. Several expense summaries used formatting templates introduced by accounting software released long after I had already left the family business. Someone had recreated old financial reports using modern software. Whoever forged them hadn't realized the templates themselves could reveal the truth. I looked up. Dorian. He smiled politely. Yes. When exactly were these reports printed? His answer came almost immediately. They're original records. No. I tapped one page. They aren't. A few relatives exchanged confused looks. Dorian folded his arms. What are you talking about? I turned the binder toward the family. This accounting standard didn't exist when this report was supposedly written. Silence. Several people leaned closer. I flipped another page. And neither did this reporting format. Another page. This software version wasn't released until 4 years later. Another page. Neither was this tax disclosure. The atmosphere around the table changed. The certainty that had filled the gathering only minutes earlier slowly gave way to uncertainty. One of my uncles adjusted his glasses. What does that mean? It means these documents weren't created when they claim they were. I looked directly at Dorian. They were manufactured later. He laughed. A little too loudly. Ariella, you're reaching. I ignored him. Instead, I continued turning pages. The deeper I examined the binder, the more inconsistencies appeared. Duplicate authorization numbers. Identical approval timestamps. Sequential transaction IDs assigned months apart. No legitimate accounting system would ever produce records like that. I removed my phone from my pocket. Without saying a word, I began photographing every page. Click. Another page. Click. Another. Click. Dorian's smile slowly disappeared. What are you doing? Preserving evidence. His voice became sharper. You don't need pictures. I absolutely do. I reached for another page. Suddenly, Dorian lunged across the table. His hand slammed onto the binder before I could photograph the next document. That's enough. The movement startled everyone. For the first time all afternoon, his calm personality cracked. His breathing became uneven. His jaw tightened. His eyes weren't filled with confidence anymore. They were filled with fear. I looked at his hand pressing against the paperwork. Why are you trying to stop me? I'm protecting private company records. No. I held his gaze. You're protecting yourself. The crowd became restless. Relatives who had supported him only moments earlier now looked uncertain. Someone quietly asked, "Why is he so nervous?" Another replied, "If she's wrong, why not let her keep looking?" Dorian quickly closed the binder. "We're finished here." "No," I answered. "We're just getting started." Before either of us could say another word, the sound of tires crunching across gravel echoed through the vineyard. Every head turned toward the driveway. A black SUV slowly entered the property. It wasn't a vehicle I recognized. It stopped near the entrance. The driver's door opened. An older woman stepped out wearing a navy blazer and carrying a silver hard case. She walked with calm confidence. Not like someone attending a family reunion. Like someone arriving to finish unfinished business. The moment Dorian saw her face, the color drained from his own. For the first time since I had returned home, he looked genuinely afraid. The black SUV came to a smooth stop near the entrance to the vineyard. No one moved. The entire family watched as the driver stepped out, walked around the vehicle, and opened the rear passenger door. An older woman emerged. She appeared to be in her early 60s. Her silver hair was neatly tied back. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse and carried a polished aluminum hard case in one hand. There was nothing dramatic about her entrance. Yet the confidence in her posture immediately drew everyone's attention. She wasn't looking around to admire the vineyard. She walked with purpose, straight toward us. When she reached the gathering, she stopped beside the long wooden table where the black binder still rested. Her eyes briefly met mine. Recognition flashed across her face. Ariella Ben Ali. I nodded slowly. Yes. It's been several years. It has. Before I could ask how she knew me, Dorian interrupted. This is a private family gathering. The woman turned toward him without the slightest hint of intimidation. My name is Celine Vorst. I know who you are, Dorian replied. His voice had become noticeably tighter. Several older relatives exchanged surprised looks. Apparently, they recognized her name as well. Celine placed the aluminum case on the table and calmly unlocked it. Inside sat a rugged laptop, several encrypted storage drives, and neatly organized folders. I wasn't planning to interrupt your reunion, she said. But yesterday morning I received something I couldn't ignore. She removed a small black flash drive. I believe this belongs to your family. Whispers immediately spread across the crowd. Dorian folded his arms. What exactly is this supposed to prove? Celine looked directly at him. We'll find out together. She connected the flash drive to her laptop. A moment later, the screen displayed a list of encrypted folders. One of my uncles frowned. What's on there? Archived accounting backups. The words immediately caught my attention. Celine continued. 3 days ago, an anonymous package arrived at my office. It contained this drive and a handwritten note requesting that I review its contents before today's reunion. She opened one folder after another. Thousands of accounting files appeared. Server logs. Audit reports. Internal emails. Digital ledgers. None of them looked like ordinary copies. They were original system backups. Every file included creation dates, revision histories, and digital verification records. Unlike printed documents, these records carried electronic fingerprints, nearly impossible to fake without leaving evidence. Celine connected her laptop to a large television mounted inside the vineyard's conference room. Everyone slowly followed her indoors. Within minutes, nearly 50 relatives stood watching the screen. The atmosphere had completely changed. Nobody cared about lunch anymore. Nobody touched the food waiting outside. Every eye focused on the data. Celine opened the company's transaction history. Rows of financial records filled the screen. She highlighted several transfers. These are the payments discussed inside Mr. Benally's binder. She glanced toward Dorian. They do exist. Several relatives immediately looked back at me. For one uncomfortable moment, I feared the evidence might actually support his accusation. Then Celine clicked another tab. The destination accounts expanded into a detailed ownership report. A network diagram appeared on the screen. One shell company connected to another. Then another. Eventually, every transaction pointed toward a single corporate holding. Celine enlarged the final page. Registered owner. Dorian Benally. The room fell silent. No whispers. No gasps. Only silence. My father stared at the screen without blinking. One aunt slowly covered her mouth. Someone quietly muttered, "That can't be right." Celine continued speaking. The printed documents distributed today redirect these transfers toward Ariella. She opened another window. The original server records never did. With a few more clicks, she displayed the complete editing history of several accounting files. The projector highlighted dozens of modifications. Original entries had been deleted. Replacement entries had been inserted years later. Every edit traced back to one administrator account. Account name: DB Executive. Celine looked toward Dorian. Would you like to explain why your administrator credentials rewrote historical financial records? His face turned pale. He stopped. For the first time all afternoon. He had no answer. One of my cousins stepped forward. Dorian, you told us Ariella confessed. Another relative added, you said the company found proof years ago. There was proof, Dorian replied quickly. Celine calmly interrupted him. No, there was manipulation. She opened one final report. This one contained system login histories from the company servers. Every unauthorized alteration had occurred late at night. Every session originated from the executive office. Every login belonged to Dorian's security credentials. Even the device identification numbers matched his company laptop. The evidence formed a complete timeline. There were no missing pieces. No unexplained gaps. No reasonable alternative explanation. My father slowly sat down. He looked older than he had only an hour earlier. His eyes never left the screen. I accused my own daughter. He barely whispered the words. No one answered him. Across the room, Dorian suddenly took one step backward. Then another. His breathing grew faster. He looked toward the exit as if calculating whether he could still leave before anyone stopped him. That was the moment I realized something. Celine hadn't come to defend me. She had come because someone else had trusted her with the truth. And whoever had sent that anonymous flash drive was still somewhere inside this very room. No one moved. The conference room had become so quiet that I could hear the air conditioner humming above us. Dorian remained frozen near the doorway. His eyes darted around the room, searching for anyone, who might defend him. No one did. Every relative who had believed him only minutes earlier now looked at him with disbelief. My father slowly stood. His voice was barely recognizable. Dorian. He paused. Tell me she's wrong. Dorian swallowed hard. The files were manipulated. Celine folded her arms. Then explain why your administrator account created every revision. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. One of my uncles stepped closer to the television. You said Ariella emptied the company accounts. Celine shook her head. The money never left the company's records directly. She enlarged another financial chart. The funds were moved gradually over 6 years. Small transactions. Consulting payments. Equipment leases. Vendor reimbursements. Individually, they attracted little attention. Together, they totaled millions of dollars. Every payment eventually reached companies that existed only on paper. And every one of those companies traced back to Dorian. A murmur spread through the room. Some relatives looked angry. Others looked embarrassed. A few refused to meet my eyes. I understood why. For years they had believed the worst about me without asking a single question. Before anyone could speak again, a quiet voice came from the back of the room. I think it's time everyone knows the rest. The crowd slowly turned. Standing near the doorway was an elderly woman wearing a simple gray cardigan. Her name was Odette Mercer. Most people barely noticed her during family gatherings. She had worked for my grandparents for nearly 15 years. Officially, she was the estate caretaker. Unofficially, she organized every document, every archive, and every storage room inside the vineyard. She walked toward the front with calm, measured steps. I sent the flash drive. Several people gasped. Dorian stared at her in disbelief. You? Odette nodded. Yes. I watched records disappear from the archive. I watched paper files get replaced. I watched computer backups vanish. She looked directly at my father. I knew someone was rewriting history. My father frowned. Why didn't you tell us? I tried. She answered without hesitation. But every concern I raised was dismissed. She turned toward Dorian. He always had an explanation. He always convinced everyone that I had misunderstood something. Odette reached into her handbag and removed a worn leather notebook. I started writing everything down. She handed it to Celine. Inside were years of handwritten notes. Dates. Times. Names. Server maintenance schedules. File removals. Late-night office visits. Every unusual event had been carefully recorded. When I realized the digital archives were disappearing, Odette continued. I made copies before they could be erased. She looked at me. I didn't know whether anyone would believe me. So I sent everything to someone who would follow the evidence instead of family opinions. Celine nodded respectfully. It was enough to reconstruct the original accounting records. Dorian suddenly laughed. It wasn't confident. It sounded desperate. So everyone believes the housekeeper now? Nobody answered him. Because another voice spoke first. It belonged to my godmother, Mireia Salcedo. Until that moment, she had remained completely silent near one of the conference room windows. She slowly walked toward the center of the room. Every relative instinctively stepped aside. Unlike the others, Mireia never involved herself in family arguments. She only spoke when something truly mattered. She stopped directly in front of Dorian. Her expression remained calm. You remember your grandfather's final wishes? Dorian forced a smile. Of course. I don't think you do. She reached into her purse and removed a sealed document. Several relatives immediately recognized the signature on the envelope. Grandfather's. Mireia carefully opened it. Years before his passing, your grandfather amended his estate plan. She looked around the room. He asked me to serve as its independent executor. Whispers spread through the family. Very few people had known that. Mireia unfolded the document. Her eyes moved across one particular paragraph. Then she looked directly at Dorian. There is one clause that has never been discussed publicly. She closed the folder. Her voice remained steady. If any beneficiary is proven to have committed fraud against the family business or intentionally harmed another heir for personal financial gain. She paused. That beneficiary immediately forfeits every inheritance right. No one breathed. Dorian shook his head. That's impossible. Mireia calmly met his eyes. Then she spoke a single word. Disinherited. The room stood perfectly still. No dramatic shouting. No applause. No celebration. Only silence. One word had erased everything Dorian believed he would inherit. The vineyards. The executive shares. The investment accounts. The family trust. Everything. His confidence vanished completely. He stared at Mireia as though waiting for her to change her mind. She never looked away. This decision isn't mine, she said quietly. It was your grandfather's. You simply triggered it. For the first time since I had arrived at the reunion, Dorian understood that losing the inheritance was only the beginning. Because outside the conference room windows, several unfamiliar vehicles had just entered the property. The unfamiliar vehicles rolled to a stop outside the conference room. No one needed to ask why they were there. The timing answered every question. 2 federal investigators stepped out, followed by local financial crime detectives carrying document cases. Celine glanced toward them before looking back at the family. I contacted the authorities this morning. She spoke calmly. Only after verifying every file. The investigators entered the building and introduced themselves. One of them addressed Dorian directly. Mr. Ben Ali, we'd like to speak with you regarding an ongoing financial fraud investigation. Dorian forced a nervous smile. There must be some misunderstanding. The lead investigator opened a folder. Based on the evidence provided, we don't believe there is. He continued reading. Corporate fraud. Forgery. Destruction of financial records. Money laundering through shell corporations. Each charge seemed to drain more confidence from Dorian's face. He looked around the room. He searched for familiar faces. For allies. For someone willing to stand beside him. There was no one. The same relatives who had defended him all afternoon quietly stepped away. My father remained seated, unable to lift his eyes. Dorian took one cautious step backward. I need my attorney. You absolutely have that right, the investigator replied. But before you leave, we'd like you to surrender your company laptop, your mobile phone, and any storage devices currently in your possession." For several long seconds, Dorian didn't move. Then he slowly placed his phone onto the conference table. One investigator collected it. Another carefully secured the black binder that had been used to accuse me. Ironically, the forged documents themselves had now become evidence against the person who created them. As the investigators escorted Dorian toward the exit, he finally looked at me. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was empty. Whatever future he had imagined for himself had disappeared in a single afternoon. The conference room remained silent until the vehicles drove away. Only then did people begin speaking again. Quietly. Almost cautiously. One by one, relatives approached me. Some apologized. Others admitted they had believed the accusations because they trusted Dorian without question. An aunt wiped tears from her eyes. "I should have asked you what really happened." I nodded politely. "I wish you had." No bitterness. No raised voice. Just the truth. Eventually, everyone drifted outside into the fading afternoon sunlight. The reunion no longer resembled a celebration. Groups gathered beneath the vineyard trees, talking softly about everything they had witnessed. I remained near the conference room window. For a while, I simply watched the rows of grapevines stretching across the hills. Then I heard footsteps behind me. My father. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt different now. Not hostile. Just heavy. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I failed you." I turned toward him. His shoulders looked lower than I had ever seen them. "When your mother died," he continued, "I convinced myself I was protecting this family." He looked down at his hands. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped protecting you." There was no excuse in his voice. No attempt to justify what had happened. Only regret. I believed someone else instead of my own daughter. His words lingered between us. I thought about the years we had lost. The birthdays. The holidays. The unanswered phone calls. Nothing could return those years. But carrying resentment wouldn't return them either. "I accept your apology," I said quietly. "But trust isn't rebuilt in a single conversation." He nodded. "I know. And I'm willing to earn it." For the first time in more than a decade. I believed he meant it. Months passed. The criminal investigation continued. Authorities recovered a significant portion of the missing funds after tracing assets hidden through Dorian's shell companies. Several executives who had knowingly assisted him accepted plea agreements and testified about how the fraud had been carried out. The Benali family business survived. Not because it escaped scandal, but because the truth surfaced before the damage became irreversible. As for me, I accepted an invitation from the company's board to oversee financial transparency and internal auditing. Not because I wanted power. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I understood how easily trust can be abused when no one is willing to ask difficult questions. Every major financial decision now required independent oversight. Every audit became transparent. Every record was backed up in multiple secure locations. No single person would ever have the opportunity to rewrite history again. Sometimes people ask whether I regret returning to that reunion. My answer is always the same. If I had stayed home, the lies would have become permanent. Sometimes the hardest journey isn't returning to the place that hurt you. It's standing there long enough for the truth to be heard. That reunion began with my own father ordering me to leave. It ended with the truth restoring my name. Justice didn't arrive because people suddenly trusted me. It arrived because facts proved stronger than deception. And once the truth finally found its voice, no lie could silence it again. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If this story kept you hooked, and you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with shocking twists, satisfying justice, and unforgettable endings, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if your own family had believed a lie about you? Until next time, take care, and thank you for watching.